Meeting of North Norfolk District Council.
Sorry, Nigel, just remind you to turn your microphone on.
Yes, probably that's the best way to hear me. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, North Norfolk District Council, on Wednesday, the 8th of December. The first item on our agenda is to receive apologies for absence.
None received.
Thank you. Therefore, I take it we have no substitutes.
Indeed, yeah.
Public questions and statements number 3, please.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Turning to the minutes of the last meeting. So that's the meeting that was held on the 10th of November. We can go through them, please, page by page for accuracy. So page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Does anybody have any observations in regard to those, and that are you content that I should sign them as an accurate set of minutes for that meeting? Okay, thank you very much. I will do that. Item 5 is items of urgent business. I'm not aware of any.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 6 is declarations of interest. Any declarations in relation to today's business? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I have a pecuniary interest in item 15 in respect of a particular property covered by that report. So I will withdraw from the meeting at the commencement of that item and obviously will not be participating in any vote.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any others? No? Okay, thank you. So that will be noted. Petitions from the members of the public, item 7.
None received.
Thank you. Item 8 is consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member.
None received.
Thank you. Item 9 is responses of the council or the cabinet to committee reports or recommendations.
It's just the 2 there in relation to the tree planting strategy. I think they were accepted with some caveats. I think they are going to give consideration to the future maintenance of trees planted, but they didn't accept the inclusion of hedgerows in the title, and they felt that there was already generous kind of consideration given to hedgerows within that strategy. And I think there was some acceptance that consideration would be given to a future or the potential for a future biodiversity strategy.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments from the floor? No? Okay, thank you. So moving to item 10, which is our first substantive item on our agenda today. That's the waste contract. And today we have 2 guests from Serco to give us a briefing in relation to items raised on the waste contract. We have Peter Allwood, the director, as I understand it, for Serco, and we have Emma Windle from the a contract manager. So without more ado, I will hand over to Mr. Hems for that item. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. As the Chair has succinctly put, this is an update really in terms of Serco contract and information around some changes that potentially might be coming up around the way in which they will deliver some elements of the contract. And it's your opportunity to really ask any questions that you might have of Serco in relation to that contract. For many of you, you were in attendance at the workshop that we had yesterday in advance of this, so hopefully that has provided you with some context and some information around the contract, etc. And so I'll hand over to Peter Aylward, who will give you a short, there'll be no PowerPoint presentation, but he will give you a short verbal presentation. And then I think there'll be an opportunity for you to raise any issues or ask questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me there. So, yeah, apologies for no PowerPoint, or maybe you'll be thankful there's no PowerPoint. I didn't intend to do death by PowerPoint. It was really to come and have explain to you where we think we are and how we think things are going to be moving forward. Just to put things into maybe some context. So the Serco has had the contract now for 18 months. Emma, who's a senior contract manager, has been in position for the last 6 months. And myself as regional director have been in position for just coming up to 3 months. So that gives you a bit of context for Emma and my roles here. I think it's fair to say that what we being Serco intended to deliver as a solution hasn't been delivered so far. You're probably aware of that. There's several reasons, but by far and away the main factor has been COVID. Brexit has played a role in that. At the height of the pandemic, and having said that, over the last couple of weeks, and particularly this week, we've been hugely affected by COVID. It's coming again. So this week we're seeing the numbers really start to increase. So we had huge numbers of staff we had to isolate. Along with Brexit, we've had the knock-on effects of vehicle delivery shortages. So where we would normally, and in the past, have planned for about 6 months for a new vehicle to be delivered, they're upwards of 12 months now. And more recently, you may have been aware of the driver shortages. There was some debate as to whether that was related to Brexit, should I say, but we're very much of the opinion it's more related to COVID because of the 2 metre distance that had to be applied, meaning that drivers couldn't sit in the same cab as a trainer. This has obviously impacted us hugely there. One of the other impacts we've felt is when we did the consultation, or prior to the bid, we did the consultation with our staff, which were the Breckland. We were running Breckland at the time. And we had looked at moving from a 50-hour operation, and with the staff moving to 4 10-hour days. And at that time, so this is pre-COVID, everyone thought, the staff being everyone, thought this was a good idea because they would have 4 days and then they would have 3 days off. So it fitted a shift system that would work well. And this was then formed part of our bid. Obviously, there's lots of stresses and strains that we've all experienced in the last 2 years. And when we went back to the consultations of introducing the target operating model along those lines, there was considerable pushback from the staff saying, actually, we don't want to do 10-hour days because we're doing 10-hour days now. So we want to stick to a normal working day. We've obviously had to take that into account. And if you want, that's our burden to bear, but it obviously has an impact on the plans that we were making. Additional factors we've seen across the 3 authorities has been a significant increase of the refuse, the tonnages that we've been collecting. You may have also seen this in the news, partly to do with COVID. And if we see this from in the past, it's been called the Amazon effect. So everybody's buying in, and the waste that they didn't have before, they now have. Part of my role is the commercial waste part of the business within Serco. And what we saw is when the commercial waste tonnages around the country went down because people weren't going to restaurants, they were then getting takeaways, which meant that the waste that was normally commercial was coming back and was being municipal. There was some discussion and debate as to whether that would start to go back to what pre-COVID. We haven't seen that as yet. There's still a debate as to whether that will happen or not. We've also seen, in particular in this area, an unexpected increase of the garden waste subscribers. And that is going to affect the operation, is affecting the operation. If we take all that and we put that together, that mix, we've been forced to reevaluate and redesign the operating model we principally suggested. So now, where are we now? So now I would say, and if Steve will agree, we're in hopefully the final throes of the consultations around what that model would be. It's different to what we suggested for all those reasons and some other reasons, but those are the major reasons. Over the past weeks, we've shared all our data assumptions. So everything we see on the empirical data of where we are with tonnages and times and everything we've shared with the three councils and three authorities to get an understanding and a buy-in and acceptance that the data we're now using to plan the operating model are accurate and everyone agrees with that. We're now in the process, the final process of routing and rerouting and scheduling of those routes. We're hoping to conclude those consultations over the three councils by the end of January. One thing that has come up and is something I think that Steve has shared with you yesterday was a gap analysis. So as part of the bid, there were method statements, and during the method statements or within the method statements, there were performance or services or elements that Serco had committed to deliver in some form or other. So Steve's team has gone through and produced a gap analysis of what was in those statements and what, if you want, either hasn't been produced, shared, delivered, or in a different manner. So we obviously recognise that we haven't achieved those method statements. We're not in agreement of the amount we haven't yet because we've only just got the list. So our commitment is to take that list away. We got it just over a week ago, and to work through that list and to come back with a commitment from Serco as to how we either want to address those. And there's various methods of, one is the delivery of those, one is maybe a replacement or come to a commercial agreement on that. But we will be doing that in the next few weeks. I think from me, that sort of explains where we think we are. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Peter. I'll throw it open to questions then. I think just before I do, I think it's very useful that we had the briefing yesterday, and from my point of view, your mention of the gap analysis is, I think, very helpful, and what you've said in relation to what needs to be done in terms of filling and closing that gap is really helpful. For me, having had a look at the colours, on the gap analysis spreadsheets, they probably do convey a message just by the colour, the RAG ratings of those alone. So I think that was very helpful. So for me, that gap analysis is at the heart of this in terms of how we see the situation. And probably one other point that I ought to make is that, of course, we are not too many months away from the second anniversary of this contract. And I think it must be a matter of some concern to members that we are this far in, albeit what you've said, I understand, but I think it is a matter of some concern that we are this far into the contract and we've got so many of those colours, the red colours and the amber colours in that gap analysis. So it's with that kind of, in that context, that I open it up now to questions, please. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Echo those comments I think that Nigel's just made. But could you just go back to the consultations that you mentioned that are informing the the redesign of the operating model. So could you just explain, are those consultations with the three authorities only, or is that a wider process? Who are the consultees in that process?
Yes, certainly. So, yes, so with the three councils, obviously, but also with our three teams locally to understand that they, if you want, buy into this because they have to deliver it, to ensure that there's a central team that's doing the planning, but obviously they don't know the geography, the locations, certain things that are happening. They certainly don't know the local teams. So the key part is, one, to do this from centrally, to look at, if you want, the theoretical model, whether that works. The second stage is then to go and talk to the local teams. So if you can picture that, we for each of the routes, we print out a map, we put it in the room, we get the local teams to come in and walk through each of those. And do you think this is possible? Does it make sense? Are we missing something here? Once that's done, to do with the routing specifically, then we'll go to the local operating team. In this sense, it would be Scott here, and say, okay, do you think this works? And do you consider any issues there? When we've got those three boxes ticked, then we're comfortable that we're ready to go live, as it were. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. So you don't talk to sort of any end users, as it were, sort of members of the public who obviously use the service?
We don't, no.
Thank you.
So if I can just add for the benefit of members, the original Serco bid was for 50-hour working week. That didn't mean that the crews were working 50 hours. What they were looking at was 4 10-hour days for those crews rather than 5 8-hour days. So in terms of that initial bid, the reason for that was because if you work in that pattern, you obviously reduce the number of vehicles that you're able to run. You sweat the assets, as it's called commercially. And so from that point of view, it was an economically advantageous position for Serco to have that. That was based on the discussion they had with Breckland employees, where Serco were the incumbent contractor. I think probably what's been realised by Serco is that the three authorities are quite significantly different, even though they are close geographical neighbours, and that for North Norfolk especially, there is an element to which the seasonality and the complexity of our district is, I think it probably would be fair to say, is probably the most complex contract that Serco has in some, or element of contract that Serco has. What's become apparent through talking to their staff is that actually, in terms of the complexity and in terms of the staff wishes, they're not interested in doing a 50-hour or doing those 10-hour days, because it limits the ability for them to, well, it effectively puts the same position they're in the moment over 4 days, because they're currently working 10-hour days with overtime. So there isn't that appetite amongst the staff to be able to do it, and there are reasons beyond that in terms of service delivery that make it difficult. So I think that's where the original consultation that was referred to, and the consultation from our point of view, is that Serco are obviously now coming back and saying, we'd like to discuss, or we think this is a different model. And at the moment, I don't think you're able to say, because I explained yesterday around the zonal model, and I don't think at the moment you're far enough along that process to be able to say actually what your model might look like in detail, because you're currently testing a load of assumptions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hollin.
Thank you, Chair. Is it possible to quantify how much of the underperformance is due to COVID and Brexit, and how much is due to sort of over-optimism at the time of the bid?
Simply put, no, unfortunately. I'm a great one for stats personally, and looking at empirical data, I wouldn't know how to measure that myself, so sorry, we're unable to do that. Not unwilling, just unable.
Okay. Councillor Hasden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going a bit colourblind, and as a photographer, I find that quite unacceptable. And I've just picked on one item in here. which says annual service delivery plan will anticipate and plan for fluctuations in service activity and include a risk analysis and a log to plan for and provide contingency measures. Mr. Hems has just referred to the contract as being complex, and yet no delivery plan has been provided. That's grossly unacceptable, isn't it? Strategic planning must be a major part of your work. How come we have a red line and nothing's been planned? No strategic planning's taken place. No reporting on strategic planning.
Unfortunately, not having worked through the list, it's difficult for me to comment. I think probably several of the items within the list are probably not acceptable, but for me to comment on individual ones would be impossible at the moment.
That's not acceptable in itself. This is strategic planning, for goodness sake. You've mentioned COVID, the Amazon effect, which is an appalling analysis, because in the last year, 5,110 square miles of the Amazon was deforested. And you're telling us you haven't had a look and know how to go through this list, and you have no strategic plan. Don't you consider that's quite a significant failure?
Probably not a shining moment.
Here, Councillor Brown, and then Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to drill down into one aspect of the bidding process. I mean, did you actually consult with your staff before or at the time of the bidding process to ascertain whether they would be prepared to do 50 hours over 4 days or whatever it is in comparison to what they normally work? And also, is it a sweat in the asset too far to alter the system that you have of doing alternate bin collections in the same area and putting all 10 crews, I believe you have, into one confined part of the district, as compared to how we used to operate, doing one half of the district with one delivery and the other half with the recycling delivery or whichever?
So I'll take the first part, if I may. So yes, we did consult with the Breckland staff, and this was obviously pre-COVID. And to put it simply, they were up for it. They saw the benefits of 4 days, then they had 3 days off, and I think they simplistically, and this is not a criticism or anything, I think they simplistically saw and the benefits of that, and said, we've no issues with that. So the second part, I'll let Emma answer.
Good morning. So just to add on from what Peter was saying there about the staff, it was actually the staff that came to the Serco management team and asked them if they would consider a shorter working week, because at the time it was quite a viable option in lots of different companies, and some staff had actually been attracted to go and work for companies that were offering that working pattern. So and when we were doing exit interviews at the time, that feedback was given, so therefore it was taken into consideration when we did the bid, and therefore a vote was taken, and they asked if that could be considered. So at the time I believe it was very attractive, but given the constraints of COVID and all the other things that have happened since, it's not quite as appealing. And I think the one thing, if I'm being brutally honest, is that they didn't quite realise that that would negate any opportunity for overtime for them, because with drivers' hours, it would prevent them going above their standard, above the 10 hours. So once that was considered, then they changed their minds about whether that being viable. Regarding the option, so with regard to the way that we're putting the proposal forward now, what we're considering is the carbon footprint effect. That's predominantly one of our main concerns. So what we're doing is looking at the tip locations and planning the vehicles around the closest tip points. And again, what we need to do is reduce the number of miles that the vehicles travel. So eventually, obviously, we need to move towards the use of electric vehicles, or at least more environmentally sustainable vehicles. And in order to do that, we need to establish a sort of plan, if you like, a model of working that enables us to maximise the use of the available tip opening times and to reduce the miles. And the model that we've come up with, which is being done through a system called Web Aspects, which is a route modelling system, and then locally changed to support local knowledge and sort of bits of information that you can't possibly tell a computer system. And we've come up with what we consider to be the best option. At the moment, we're going through the process of checking that and validating the routes, which is why we've not got the sort of finished product at the moment. But the absolute aim is to provide the most efficient routes with the least amount of miles.
Councillor Bathory.
Good morning. Yes, actually, I do understand there has been some mitigating circumstances into the poor contract operation. And I'm just wondering if you have been monitoring vaccination uptake with your staff to mitigate the COVID effect. And I'd also ask about the fuel supply problem. My area is very on the edge of North Norfolk and seem to be affected by the shortage of fuel. And I understood in the contract there was something that you would have a central supply of fuel yourselves. But I understand that some bin lorries were actually queuing up with the general public to get fuel. And this affected some of the deliveries in my area. So I'd like your comments on that. Thank you.
I'll answer that if I may. So firstly, yes, we are monitoring the take-up of the vaccine, and I'm pleased to say that we've got 96% double vaccinated people across the contract at the moment, which is absolutely fantastic. We've had a great response. One thing that we've done is provided counselling is probably the wrong word, but an advisory service, so that if anybody's got any concerns with regard to vaccinations and the potential after effects of that, then we've provided access to that guidance. We've also given people time off to go during work time, so that they don't they've got easy access to it. And we are now similarly encouraging the booster vaccination as well, which has got a huge uptake in the area. So we're really happy with that, particularly in North Norfolk. Going on to your second question with regard to the fuel, you're absolutely right that the contract did commit to providing a bunkered fuel facility. That bunkered fuel tank was purchased at the several months ago now. I think it's about 6 or 7 months ago, certainly before I started on the contract. We've had the problem with installing it has been with our landlords at the depot which we operate. So a while ago there was a fuel spillage which I believe got into the interceptors or the drainage system and caused a bit of a problem, and obviously that's not anything we would want to repeat. Therefore we've had to go through quite an extensive planning process to obtain permission to put the tank there, not only from the landlord but obviously from the Kent County Council, sorry, that's where I was from, Kent, Norfolk County Council as well. So we have had quite a few hoops to jump through. Great news is that the permission's now been granted. We've got we will be we have to put down a slab which will accommodate the tank and will provide protection in case of any leakage. That's going down in January, and the tank will be installed shortly after we've got the tank. And that will be then commissioned at the end of January, beginning of February. There's quite a lot of electric work that needs to go to it as well. So with regard to Breckland, just so you know, the whole contract situation is the tanks ordered there, be delivered in January, that will be installed. So that also will be protected. And with regard to Kings Lynn, unfortunately, from a health and safety perspective, we're unable to put a tank on that site. So we are looking at alternatives with regard to access access to a wider range of fuel delivery outlets. And so far that we believe that in the unfortunate event of any future incident, that we will be well protected.
I've got Councillor Heinrich and then Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's looking at this gap analysis. It's not a pretty picture. Going back to my previous career in schools, if I saw that much, I'd be putting in special measures. So I'm concerned. However, the next question is, how are we going to get out of it? What are your priorities for dealing with these issues identified? What do you intend to do about each of them, or certainly the priorities? And what's your timescale? I mean, we can't carry on like this. As has been said, we're nearly 2 years into the contract. It ought to be running smoothly now. Certainly a lot more smoothly than this gap analysis is showing. So priorities, how are you going to attack those and get at least those sorted? And what is your timescale? Thank you.
I don't disagree with your summary of the situation. As far as timescales, the only timescale I can give is for us to come back to Steve and the teams as to Serco's response to the individual statements or assessments of each of the method statements. We're working through that. I would imagine by mid-January we'll be in a position to come back and put forward our suggestion as to how each of the points could be dealt with.
Chair, if I could just add, we have for a period of time raised a number of issues with Serco. They go back to a meeting we had in terms of what's commonly known in contract as a page turn, where we were going through and identifying elements. Some of those things have been addressed by Serco, so that was back to October of 2020. Some of those things have been addressed. They were sort of the priorities at the time. I think it's fair to say that because of service delivery, and our focus very much has been about delivering the core services, and I do recognise that there have, there have been challenges, and I think most authorities would recognise in terms of service delivery that COVID has had an impact. I think within North Norfolk and probably the rest of Norfolk, we've been very fortunate compared with a lot of other authorities. I mean, just across the border in Kings Lynn, where they provide food waste to all of their residents, Kings Lynn had to suspend that service for a significant period of time. There are lots of authorities around other parts of the country where they've stopped collecting their garden bins because they had to put crews onto delivering core activities of residual and recycling. So we've been fortunate, partly because we haven't had the level of COVID they've had in the rest of the country, but partly because of the work that we've been doing with Serco to reprioritise activity on a day-to-day basis to enable those core activities to be delivered. And I think our focus, as we've had a bit of a pause, I think it was a pause by the looks of it from COVID, it's given us opportunity to look back into the contract and say, okay, what did you say you would deliver? Now let's list it. And I appreciate the proportion of those that are red and amber is very high. That's predominantly because it is a gap analysis. It doesn't list all the things they are delivering, because clearly that would be another element of work on top of what we were trying to achieve. So I know it looks very bleak, but that's because we've only picked out the reds and the ambers. The greens are the things that we've raised and have recently been done. So we are making progress. What I would look to from Serco, I think from our point of view and in part of the contract as a whole, because this is the three authorities together, is that position of commitment going forward into the future to work out what we do with these. And I think we do have those options, as Peter alluded to earlier. We either turn around and say, you deliver them, we negotiate on those in terms of deliver differently, or alternatively that we turn around and there is a commercial conversation, which is maybe, okay, we accept that you're not going to be able to do this for the X, Y reason. What financial benefit or impact does that have where we make where we're not paying for things that aren't being delivered. So I think I would hope that we can be in a position where we can continue those discussions. It is very early days. We only shared it with Serco last week or so ago. So I think, we would look to that in January for those commitments and conversations to continue. But rest assured that we as authorities and I as the supervising officer of this contract, I am holding Serco's toes over a rather large fire most of the time.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I accept that, and I have all confidence in you in dealing with this too. I just wonder whether we should have a report on progress to this committee every couple of months, so we are fully au fait with what is happening. Thank you.
Your point is well made, Councillor Heydrich, and I think we'll pick that up in the conclusion if you are content to leave it at that point for now. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back to the electric vehicles point, which you mentioned as wanting to transition to use of those, which I think we'd all agree is laudable. If they're robust, they do the job properly. I just wonder, do those electric vehicle waste or electric waste vehicles exist at the moment? And if they do, are you already using them, or are you planning to move over to them, or is that a technology that just isn't out there at the moment in terms of that size of vehicle? Thank you.
Okay, I'll respond to that. So yes, the answer is yes, the technology does exist at the moment. It's still in its infancy. There are our competitors that have implemented contracts around the country with electric vehicles. We are very committed to moving in that direction. We would be looking at converting 2 or 3 year old vehicles into electric vehicles as the best strategy forward. So it's a way of being very responsible with the money that we're spending and the way that we can get the best out of the asset. So we believe that in a couple of years' time, or perhaps not even a couple of years, perhaps a year's time, the technology will have moved on considerably, and we would, the lessons will have been learned elsewhere, and that is definitely, on our radar, and we will be doing that. With regard to other types of vehicles, we do have quite a lot of electric vehicles on the fleet already. So we have a lot of vans that are electric vehicles, the toilet cleaning vans and that kind of thing. They're all run with electric, purely electric vehicles. So it's something that Serco is very committed to, and look forward to being able to implement further.
Just again to add, so where those vehicles, electric dust carts, if you like, are being deployed, they are in extremely urban areas with very close proximity to tipping points. Because they don't have a massive range. We have already made the fleet that we procured has electric bin lifts on them, where they have a benefit environmentally because they're an electric lift. They're not running the engine at a higher revs. The engine idles whilst the bin lift is happening. So there are some benefits to that. One of the things that we're looking at and we're talking to Serco about in respect to vehicles is not just electric, but also HVO, the hydrogenated vegetable oil. In terms of that, we have had a very initial discussion about additional vehicles, and one of the things we spoke about last week was, okay, that's fine, but is there an opportunity to look at alternative fuel from diesel on any new vehicles that are coming in? Just to give you an example of the technology and the issues at the moment, Serco approached me about the possibility of trialling an all-electric, effectively 7.5 ton vehicle on our round, and we said yes, we'd be interested. But when the paperwork came back, the vehicle was 16 ton. I felt that was too big to be able to manage on our contract because of its size. Actually, when we looked at it, the vehicle was around 10 tons in size, but about 6 tons of the additional weight was down to the batteries that are on there. Now, clearly, when you're doing a refuse collection, you have to have the capacity within the vehicles. So I think at the moment, and obviously there are lots of technologies that, initially we were talking about electric. That was the discussions we had. HVO a year, 2 years ago wasn't really on, it was, but it wasn't really a serious contender. And obviously hydrogen is now being significantly talked about, and maybe the future of larger vehicles, in particular in terms of transport. So we're looking at all of those, and we are in regular contact with Serco and discussions about that.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Lloyd, Councillor Withington, Councillor Housden and Councillor Cushing, and I'm aiming to close the list at that point. So over to you, Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you. I'd just like to tell members that I was involved with this bidding process going back almost 18 months before the current administration took control. And I've seen the bid develop along with 3 other councils, I have to say. It's not just North Norfolk's decision. So the bids took a lot of scrutiny. And one of the things that impressed me about Serco was actually the stuff that's on the list that we've just been referring to, because that's where the added value is. You know, obviously we're keen on price and quality, but those things on that list are actually really important to us. So I'm pleased to hear this morning that you're working on them. And I know that in my regular meetings with Serco and Steve's even more regular meetings, you know, informally and formally, we've been pushing on these items for some time. So I'm really pleased to hear that you've given us some dates now to come back to us on those things. I think the transition from the previous operator to yourselves went very smoothly. In fact, the word seamlessly has been used. I don't think our customers actually realised what was going on, which is to your credit, and a big relief to me personally, I have to say. Also, during the COVID stuff, when you look around other councils, and Steve has stolen some of my thunder that I was going to say this morning already, but that's fine. Lots of councils stopped doing food waste collections. Lots of councils stopped doing the green waste, garden waste collections. We didn't. Serco carried on doing those, and that's to be applauded. The challenges that we had, and there have been quite a few. There was the pingdemic. The services continued during the pingdemic when half the country was actually stood down. The fuel crisis. We got through that largely because your operators were working out of hours trying to find garages to fill up on. But going back to the fuel tank, that was a contractual issue, as you well know, and you mentioned this morning. That would have seen you through that period, and it's probably cost you quite a bit of money in the fact that you didn't have it in terms of overtime payments and extra collections. The target operating model, as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of value in that for this council. We've declared a climate emergency. We're very keen to see the outcome of that, because during the bidding negotiations, Serco certainly intimated that there would be efficiencies that would relate in lower carbon figures. So it's timely now that you actually implement those and bring us those service delivery improvements. I would like to mention billing. We're happy to have the money in our account, but I think it would be good for our balance sheets and yours that you actually start addressing that matter. HVO fuel, Steve mentioned. I've been talking to some environmental scientists who feel that if the electric can't be used and hydrogen isn't with us yet, then HVO fuels are the best way forward for the environment. And I'm glad to hear that you're actively considering those. Finally, the carbon footprint. In my meetings with your local managers, I have brought this up before, that we would like an annual figure from you so that we can monitor your performance, and that also that you can monitor your own, to be quite frank. So that was all I was going to say. I didn't want to take up too much time, but Bit of positives, bit of negatives. So.
If I can answer the carbon footprint thing. So I remember you bringing it up a while ago. What we did then is commissioned a study, and that's ongoing at the moment through a team at Serco. So what they're doing is establishing a baseline from the previous situation, if you like, and then monitoring it on a monthly basis. So once we achieve 6 months, we'll be able to feed that figure back, because the one thing that's really important to us is not just taking one step in the right direction, but it's that ethos of continuously trying to achieve a better state, and that's what we want to demonstrate throughout the study. So we will be in a position to share that with you early in the new year, so that's ongoing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. If we can keep matters brief, because I'm conscious of the time and we do need to round this off. Councillor Withington.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify really that the gap issues that are being experienced are consistent across all three authorities, and we're not having a more serious situation than the other two authorities that are involved in this.
So they are broadly consistent. There are some areas where Serco are probably providing some element of information or activity or whatever it might be. That tends to be a hang up from the previous contract, because obviously the contract managers and staff who were in place within those are predominantly in place when the contract went live are still the same. So if they had a relationship, for instance, I'm in Kings Lynn, the contract manager there, the operations manager there, had a number of systems and processes in place that probably weren't in place for North Norfolk and others, and he's continued those. So there are odd bits, but broadly, when you see when you look across, if it's not being provided or we're not sure it's being provided, it's across all three authorities.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Houser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you putting the electronic advertising, I don't know what it's called, on the side of the vehicles? I thought this was going to be part of the LEDs. Yeah, okay, the LEDs, because that would be good for the residents, I'm quite sure.
So the LEDs, as far as I understand, is on that list, and that's part of the discussion we will have from starting mid-January. So no decision has been made either way. So it may be that we come back and say, possibly we do something else, or possibly we do agree it makes sense to do that, and then it's a timing issue. So we want to look at the holistic picture of all those things and then come back with a suggestion to Stephen, Rhiannon and Barry and say, this is how we intend to resolve the issues, and we'll discuss and I suppose negotiate a final position.
Councillor Housen, the LED panels were going on 2 of our vehicles. They were only on the trade waste vehicles, for clarity. The rest have got what they call Epic, it's the manufacturer, but they have got the static panels. I think the position around LEDs is one that we need to resolve. There are lots of pros for them. There are some cons, not least of which running an LED panel takes quite a lot of power. And from a carbon footprint point of view, we need to consider that in a holistic manner. So I think we need to weigh those advantages, but Serco need to come back with a commercial proposition around that of yes, we're providing, or no, we want to talk to you about it. And we're not there yet. Thank you.
Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, very for Officer Hems, and we've got the gap analysis, which you've got 14 pages of red and ambers on there. Just really I'll request you will be sort of looking to prioritise that. Obviously, from our perspective, it's very hard to see the wood from the trees in there. Do you have the view in terms of what you want knocked off first in terms to get those back to green and the deadlines for doing that?
Yes, although we have to negotiate, because this is a contract across 3 authorities, I think there is potential, and we're quite different authorities in some respects. I think there is, we will be having that discussion internally about what our priorities are. We'll be looking for some quick wins, but certainly I think, some of the elements that are high profile or high benefit in terms of the offerings that we have, we will be looking to prioritise. So some of that added value element, I think, is important to us, not least of which because it resolves some of the issues of other elements. They're quite a lot of interrelated. So yes, we will be prioritising those. The bit of me, there's a little bit of me that says I want them all doing straight away because we're 18 months into a contract and they should have been done by now. But that doesn't take account of the other issues that have been shared with you earlier around COVID, etc.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Well then, I think it's probably time to try and sum up if we can, where we are. Having listened to all that's been said, it's not all bad news, and there are lots of good points, and undoubtedly we want to maintain a positive and constructive relationship. It's probably the biggest contract that this council lets, and it's certainly the most what I would call public facing service that this council provides. And to that extent, much of our reputation is around that and the delivery of that. So that's why we take a particular interest in making sure that the interests of North Norfolk District Council and our residents are in the forefront. So to put it very bluntly, the gap analysis, I think, shows that we are paying for quite a lot, but we're not getting what we should be. And that's a situation that I don't think we can allow to continue. You've heard some pretty strong views expressed today, and I think that gives you some idea, I think, of the kind of priority that this committee would want to place on the closing of those gaps. Now, it's not our role to get involved in the minutiae of that. That's very much an officer contractor relationship that we want to see resolved, and we want to see it resolved in the shortest possible time. So I think from my point of view, I think I'd like to get from you today confirmation that you are going to engage in that process to close that gap. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Can we put some kind of time scale on that? That would be very helpful, I think, to us, so that we can gain some confirmation that matters are being progressed constructively and in a timely manner with the officer team. And so I think what we would like to do is come back to this topic at a later point in our work programme, and if only to gain assurance that all matters have been resolved, the gaps have been closed, and we've moved on. So are you able to give us some kind of time scale when you will have reached, and I think there are some discussions to be had here. This is about negotiating, not us laying down, this has got to be that and so forth. There are some toing and froing to be done, but I think basically I'd like to get some kind of time scale from you as to when that's likely to reach fruition.
Reach fruition, difficult to say. When our commitment to coming back to Steve and his team to, if you want, put Serco's position and suggestions and proposal would be, I would say, the second to third week in January. And then it will obviously be dependent on the negotiation and the agreement on, I suppose, the priorities of how we're going to deal with some, and the ones we are going to still deliver, when we're going to deliver those, and the dates we're going to deliver them. So that's obviously then down to the 1, 2, 3, 4 parties getting agreement. Difficult to put a timescale on that because we can't determine that. But Serco's commitment to working as hard as we can to get to that agreement as quickly as possible. Benefit to us is, I would say, almost greater financially to achieving and getting to the delivery. Serco is making a significant loss, and we need to get to the point where we're delivering the service as we intended to or now intend to. So the motivation there is great for Serco.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. Mr. Black, do you wish to
May I suggest then, given the time frame has just been outlined and the question you've posed, would it be appropriate to invite Peter back in April, because that will be the 2nd year anniversary? And I think anything before that day is unrealistic, given the timescale for the proposition to be put to the officer team, both here and across the partnership as a whole, and to agree anything meaningful. So I would like to propose, Chair, that you invite Mr. Elwood back into your April meeting. That will be the 2nd anniversary of the contract.
Thank you for that. I had that timescale in mind myself, actually. It was a very meaningful point. That's why I mentioned it earlier, that we're not that far off it, but I think we've probably got enough time to be able to resolve the vast majority of these matters. I think it might be helpful as well, perhaps in February and March, if we had a verbal update as to how progress was going. It need be no more than that. And then in April, we would then have a confirmation from yourselves. And how does that feel? Does that feel about right? I think we need to let January pass, and we'll review the situation. Only a very brief update. It can be as short as it's going well, we will be content with that. But I think we do need to be able to sign this matter off at the 2nd anniversary of the contract, and that will be very, I think, a satisfactory programme to get the matter resolved. So I think with that proposal that we've given the matter a very good hearing. We'll formally bring the matter back to the April meeting, and in the meantime, for February and March, we'll get a verbal update on how progress has been going. If you're satisfied with that, I put that forward as a proposal. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Heinrich, can I have a show of hands, please, to support that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you both for coming today. It's been I hope, not too bad experience for you, but I think it's been a useful experience for us. And I hope you go away with the feeling that we are very concerned. We are very much engaged in how this service develops and is delivered in the future. And we look forward to a very constructive and positive relationship with you. So we look forward to hearing better news in April.
And I look forward to delivering that. So thank you for today. Nice to meet you all. Just wanted to finish by putting it slightly into context, but a commitment. So obviously, Emma and I weren't around 2 years ago for the bid. We weren't around for the vast majority of the time where the delivery. We're exceptionally committed to helping put this right. And you have that commitment, not just from Serco, but from us personally here today.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, if we can move on then to item 11, which is the Treasury Management Report, half-yearly report for 21-22. Councillor Seawood.
Good morning, members, and thank you, Chairman. The report's in front of you. It's been before the Cabinet. If members have any particular questions on this, Lucy Hume is sitting next to me to try and answer them. So over to your committee and any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this report? Councillor Withington.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have got a question. It's to do with the changes to the SIPFA, put my teeth back in, SIPFA code, and in particular about our ability to borrow for commercial investment. I see that it is now going to be completely prohibited, whereas before it was more linked to the Public Works Loan Board. So my question to Lucy is, have we got any further consultations coming up about that shortly, and will we be putting any representation in regard to that?
Thank you for your question. So the short answer to that is yes. So SIPFA first consulted on the two new versions of the Treasury Management Code and the Prudential Code of Capital Finance back in February. I think it's fair to say the changes they propose were quite radical in terms of effectively outlawing some of these commercial investments. Going a lot further than MHCLG, as was then, had previously gone. It did provide quite a lot of kickback from the sector as a whole, and I think there was a general view that there was a lot of unintended consequences for some of the things that CIPFA were proposing. So they are committed to kind of re-consulting. So they have published the revised codes in draft format, subject to a second round of consultation, which we've been responding to. I'm not hopeful there will be wholesale changes, given they have already published a draft revised code, but I'm hopeful that some of the wording around kind of banning some of those commercial investments will be amended. I think that it could be read and interpreted in ways which would disturb some of our treasury management activity that's completely unrelated to borrowing for commercial investment, and I think that needs tidying up, and I think that case has been made by ourselves, other authorities, and also Arlen Close, our Treasury advisor. So hopefully we'll see some revised wording around that. It just in addition to that, I think in the report, I mentioned that we were expecting shortly a consultation with respect to minimum revenue provision and other capital guidance coming out of DLUC. Since I wrote this report, we have now had that consultation published, and there are two major further changes within that consultation, which look to disturb some of the activities that we already undertake. So we'll be providing representations to that as well. And if any councillor wishes to sort of speak to me in more detail about those consultations or those responses, then I'm happy to follow that up outside of the meeting as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any others? No? Okay, then we are asked to resolve that the Treasury Management Report is approved. So can I have a proposer and a seconder then? I've got Councillor Spagnola and Councillor Withington. Show of hands, please, on that. Okay, that looks like unanimous to me. Thank you. Moving on then to item 12, managing performance quarter 2 of 21-22 year.
We do have, I believe, Helen Thomas and Lucy Wilshire.
Yes,
are going to provide a presentation.
I was going to offer Councillor Seawood whether he wished to speak first.
Because Sarah can't, she's on another meeting, I believe, this morning, Chairman. So this report's in front of you. It's been before the Cabinet. It relates to quarter 2, which my recollection is at the end of September, July to September. So that's what this particular report relates to. In the light of comments that have been made previously, the officers have sought to try and improve the reporting of performance, and we hope that that will be helpful to your committee in your questions that you ask.
Okay, thank you. Officer Thomas.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. What we've been asked to do is give a very short presentation on what our proposals are for benchmarking activity that Overview and Scrutiny might like to take up in future. As you know, benchmarking is a useful tool in assessing our performance. It can be used alongside other information to assess whether or not action is needed to improve performance against our own targets, against government standards, looking at complaints information, that sort of thing. So what we're proposing is that you review a benchmarking report that I'll just introduce Lucy Wilshire, our corporate data analyst, and decide what sort of way you want to use it. We have some proposals as to how you might want to use it, and the frequency you might want to look at it at, and how you want to program that into your work program. So I'll just introduce you to Lucy Wilshire, our corporate data analyst, and she'll take you through the reports that we're proposing that you look at, and make suggestions about how you could use them. So I'll just mute myself and pass you over to Lucy.
Thanks, Helen. Great, so I'll just share my screen and I shall go through where we've put the reports. Great. So hopefully you can see that now. So we've got we use Algae Inform for a lot of our data reporting. So we did a demonstration to some of the members a few months ago on Algae Inform. So if anybody who missed that training would like or anybody who would like a recap on that training, do get in touch with Helen or myself and we can go through that again with you. So the benchmarking reports we've put on our data web page, which is here. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which I shall forward to Democratic Services after this meeting, so you don't need to write any notes. So the Algae Inform reports are at the bottom of this web page. So they're all here under the title North Norfolk in detail. And the 2 performance reports are at the bottom. So we've got them, they're the same reports, so pre-built reports from Algae Inform on benchmarking data, and we've selected one for our SIPFA nearest neighbours, so therefore local authorities like ourselves are generally rural local authorities and ones on the coast, and then we've got a group for our East of England neighbours, local authorities as well. And you can also get to the data web page via our, so I just opened a new tab, via our intranet page. If you go to My Services, we've got a corporate delivery unit section, and I've got a page called Data and Evidence Gathering. And you can get to the data page from here as well. And then we've also got some more guidance on Algae Inform if you wanted to just learn about that yourself. And we did actually record the member training, so if you wanted to just recap on that in your spare time as well, you could. Yes, if I just click on one of these reports, that takes you directly through to the report. So that should just come up with the report you've clicked on. So it's a good idea just to check it's picked up the location that you want. So check that it says North Norfolk on the top data table and that it's picked up the comparison group North Norfolk for nearest neighbours. If it hasn't for any reason, sometimes it doesn't, if you're logged in, it'll pick up your default location. If it hasn't for any reason, you just change it back in these filters at the top. It's very easy to do. Just change your area here and then select the comparison group there and click apply. So Algae Inform have selected general benchmarking measures for us. There's 33 on here in about, I think, 9 different areas. So yes, sorry, hopefully you can see that. So it's got these sort of 9 different areas here, but I won't go through them all today because we're a bit short of time. So yeah, I'll leave you to look at those yourself. So I'm just going to demo council tax for now. So for each one, you've got sort of a little rag status here. So you can basically see North Norfolk is the purple circle. So you can see that's a little bit below the mean for the group that's selected. So the blue square is the mean for the group. And you can see there's a little directional symbol at the side. So we're worsening for council tax non-collection. But that's given you just a basic overview. But if you wanted to find out more detail, if you click on the name of the measure, that takes you into the detail behind that. So it's got lots of information behind here. So you've got the minimum, the mean, and the maximum for all the previous years. And then it shows you the position we are in relation to all the other local authorities within the group we've selected. Then you've got a nice little map as well. And yes, of our position against the mean for the different years. And what's quite good with each graph you can, or table, you can actually change it if you wanted to look at it different. So Yeah, so I'd quite like to look at this as a line chart. And that looks a bit cluttered to me, so I might want to just switch off the minimum and the maximum. So then I can quite easily compare North Norfolk now to the mean and look at that over time. So it's actually quite a useful report to look at. So that's just a very brief overview of how the reports work. So if I just go back to yeah, so just some considerations from those reports. So yeah, we just want you to sort of consider if you want to use those benchmarking reports, which comparison groups do you want to look at? Do you want to look at the SIPFA local authorities, the East of England local authorities, or do you want to look at both? And then how often do you want to review them, quarterly, annually, or a different period? Just to let you know, there are no monthly data sets in there. There are some quarterly data sets and some annual ones, but there could be an option you might want to review a couple of data sets like per meeting, just to sort of split it up a little bit, or you might have another idea on that. And which measures do you want to review? So you could review all of them, or the Chief Executive has suggested 7 measures you could look at, which I shall go on to the next slide in a minute, or you might have your own suggestions. So just my last slide is, these are the Chief Executive's suggestions. Some useful measures to start with. So council tax non-collection, households on housing waiting list, time taken to process housing benefit, new claims and change events, additional affordable homes, percentage of major developments, percentage of minor developments, and percentage of households waste recycled. Yeah, so that's about it from me. So it's any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Lucy. I think the way I'm thinking at the moment is that it might be helpful to have a workshop session for the committee, so that we can go through. I know we've had one previously, but this is probably rather more developed and what I would call the next stage of that process. And in particular, if we can focus on the benchmarking aspects of it, that would be useful, I think, to take us forward. It would be a step to develop our ability to perhaps help ourselves from time to time in terms of monitoring trends and so on and so forth. So I'm getting a few nods around the chamber supporting that. So I think that probably is something that we will be asking for at the end of this. So thank you very much indeed for that. Just moving on to the report itself, I will just open that up now for questions, please. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just query a report on page 75? This is item CE 003. And it's showing an indicator which is in red across and an arrow. I just wanted to query that because it looks to me as though this trend is downward, and therefore it really ought to be a green cross and a green tick, unless I'm misreading the code. And I'm always mindful that the leader of the opposition in particular likes to query the accuracy of these symbolic measures in the report. And I'd just like to thank the officer, Bob Wade, who is leaving his position at the end of this week, for the work that he has done in reducing the number of properties, empty homes. And if you could just comment on whether that is accurate. And I think actually the numbers will improve as we move into Q3, I'm led to believe.
Mr. Thomas.
Keep forgetting to mute, I beg your pardon. Yes, what that means, that's showing that it's going in the wrong direction. That is because there was a change month on month, ever so slightly in the wrong direction, but year on year, there's been a big improvement. I believe I provided some information to Sean Knight, which he has sent through to Councillor Toy, so hopefully that will give a full explanation of what's going on. I can show you that graph of change over the last 2 years, if that would be helpful.
Sorry, that would be helpful if it's possible for you to do that.
Yeah, I can do that right now.
Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As ever, I do find these reports somewhat impenetrable at times. One thing I'd just like to perhaps question is if we look at customer focus, overall, I look at the front page and I see that lots of greens and ambers on there. Yesterday, I attended the GRAC meeting where we looked at the corporate risk register, and the nearest equivalent of that is the operational risk register, which is actually saying that we have a target score of 4, but actually a current score, target of 4 and a current score of 16, and a big red status symbol there. So I just wondered if perhaps Councillor Seward could enlighten me as to the reason for the discrepancy and which version of the truth is actually correct.
I'm not in a position to actually answer that at the moment. I don't know if the Chief Executive can help us.
I don't have my GRAC agenda. I was just trying to pull it up. I think it need to be best if we give a written response because I don't have that information with me. But I'm happy to take the question outside and provide a written response.
I would concur with that.
I've got Councillor Penfold and then Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking at page 43 of the overall agenda papers. So I'm just looking down at 4.5.4, tree planting implementation. This might be a question for Councillor Lloyd, actually. So tree planting implementation, it said it's completed, and I'm just trying to get my head around, because we haven't completed the planting of our target number of trees yet. But is that saying that what is completed is the encompassing of the implementation into the strategy? If you see what I mean. This piece of work has been encompassed within the tree planting strategy. Because I think I'm right in saying we haven't completed our implementation of tree planting yet. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm just a bit confused about the wording around that.
Yeah, Councillor Lloyd.
You're correct, Councillor Penfold.
Can you just remind me what I'm correct on?
You confused me as well a little bit.
I talked myself into a cul-de-sac there.
The tree strategy is now live. There is a detailed plan for planting, which exceeds actually our target currently, but there's a limit on how many trees you can plant each season, because you need people and you need time and you need weather and things like that. And a lack of COVID helps too. But yeah, I mean, does that answer your question? The trees aren't in the ground yet.
No.
So, but
okay,
they are planned, and we have the land and the trees available, etc.
So
some of these trees will be planted next season.
Okay, of course. Fine, thank you. So what we've completed is the implementation, the plan for the planting. Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
I wonder if that section can be amended, because it's a pretty obvious point that you've raised, a pretty valid point. And when you certainly read it, the impression that I get as a reader is that the tree planting implementation is what we're talking about. And implementation of planting means to me they're in the ground, and that's clearly not the case. I think it really ought to be perhaps just changed to reflect that.
Yeah, implementation. I'll look it up in the dictionary, Chair.
It's implementation of what, I think.
What I would say, I'm happy to take that on board, and we'll look at that with officers, if that's okay.
It would be preferable that we could read this without having to refer to a dictionary.
Well, when you embark on a project from a standing start, I hope you realise that, first of all, you have to get people, you have to get the right skills, you have to go through a procurement process, get all those things in place. You have to find landowners, you have to, etc., volunteers. It's a big thing. All that has been implemented. But I'll have a look at the wording on that, because I agree, it's a little bit ambiguous.
If we can just tweak the wording on that, that would probably be much more meaningful and obvious to the reader as to where that is. Okay, thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just return to customer focus and echo what Councillor Cushing was saying? If you look at the pie chart, you've got 7 ambers and 1. But if you actually look at the KPIs, you've got 2 reds. You have to look in 2 different places, but actually the picture, if you take it aggregatedly, if that's a word, if I have to look that one up as well, seems to me much worse than it actually looks if you look at one part and part of the other. And another point is you actually grading KPIs when there's no target, which I think is quite a difficult thing to do. And you've got customer satisfaction targets suspended due to COVID. You've got CS 3, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and they're all rated green. Well, how can they be rated green when you haven't got a target and you're not actually, they're suspended? So I think there's quite, I keep on making this point, there's quite a lot of spurious grading your own homework going on here. And that's one point. And the other point is that the information is being presented in 2 different places, a bit such as Christopher has said. And so it's difficult to get the whole picture. And just to add on to that, it would be really good if the benchmarking was actually incorporated in the report, so we didn't have to look from here onto a website and find the actual comparative number that would make us understand whether we're performing well or not. Because it's very difficult when all the information is being presented in different places to pull a picture together. Thank you.
Mr. Blatch.
Okay, so I think we aren't comparing like with like. The performance report is set against the council's corporate plan objectives. So they are internally set objectives, whereas the LG informed data is around corporate performance that is benchmarked nationally. So unless the council said it wanted to operate at an optimum level or a median level compared to other local authorities, it's not embedded in the report under customer focus. It is the performance at the back. I think in terms of I've now found the GRAC agenda and the risk that I think Councillor Cushing referred to in terms of operational status around how risk would be managed. And the comments there said operational capacity continues to be a challenge as team grapples with recovering from the additional workload that was brought about in a number of areas as a consequence of COVID pandemic. I don't think we can dispute the fact that COVID has placed significant pressure on an organisation of this size. We have had to divert resources to respond in the way that was addressed by Serco earlier. There have been fundamental changes in how our communities work and operate, and the need for support, and that has created different pressures and tensions within the organisation that we've had to respond to. So in the very early days in the lockdown, it was around supporting people to shield and self-isolate in accordance with government guidance, look at their ability to access supermarket deliveries or food and access prescriptions. And so we put a lot of resource into a community response. Subsequently, as Councillor Lloyd referred to in terms of responding to Serco, the issues they faced as the economy opened up and people weren't able to eat indoors, we have seen a very substantial volume of additional waste in our tourist areas associated with people bringing their own food and eating takeaways. So the receptacles and recycling around takeaways has meant that we've had to respond in a different way to that. And organisationally, we're an organisation of 300 staff, and we have had to divert resource to administer business grants, hardship payments through the benefit service. So I think that organisational capacity that is referred to in the risk register that was presented to GRAC yesterday addresses that issue, whereas this document is for the last 3 months, and it does say that over the period July to September 2021, we have been able to step down from our COVID response in terms of some of those corporate implications because the business grants have come to an end. The hardship payments have been much less than they were in the previous 15 months, such that we have been able to put renewed focus on delivering the corporate plan objectives. And so during that time, you have seen the adoption of the new customer services strategy. I think that reflects that section of the report that is pages 53 through to 57. In terms of the introductory report and the presentation that Lucy Wilshaw has given to you and the chairman's suggestion for a workshop, I would draw your attention to section 3.3 of the introductory report on page 29, and that shows the changes which Officer Helen Thomas and Lucy Wilshaw have made to the performance report on the basis of previous comments made through this committee. So we have sought to update the plan to provide additional information so that the original target date and the amended target date have been included. And the issue in the fourth bullet point is particularly that Lucy Wilshaw sought to address with you in terms of the benchmarking information. And the information that Lucy shared did show a number of indicators which aren't relevant or directly attributable to North Norfolk District Council. So the issues around adult health, social care, health indicators and education clearly do not sit with this authority. And that's why when Lucy outlined some objectives or some measures which when she discussed it with me, there was 7 that I suggested for debate and discussion or endorsement by yourselves. They are ones which I think most closely align or reflect service intervention and delivery by this authority, and therefore the ones which I think you should perhaps be most interested in terms of our performance relative to others. In the recent past, our performance around council tax collection of non-domestic rates has been very good. Our performance around government targets around planning at the beginning of this were not so good. And so I think the 7 sought to get that balance of areas where we were strong and where we needed to improve. So I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cushing.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that, Mr. Chairman. The performance report is obviously a historical document. In actual fact, it looks at the second quarter of the council year. So we're effectively now almost 2.5 months out of date. But if you look at the status there, and it's overall greens and ambers, the risk registers obviously look at what may happen in the future. So that's actually looking forward. So if we're talking on the GRAC report about operational side having issues about COVID, the impacts of that, if that's not being felt now in the current reporting, I'm a little bit bemused as to why it's actually in the risk register, but maybe that's a conversation offline. But there does seem to be a discrepancy there that still doesn't stack up in my mind.
You wish to respond, Mr. Mayor?
The risk register is a dynamic register, but I do think it sets a moment in time. And I think when it was originally prepared and the target date was the 31st of October, if it's the same table that we're looking at, I think the risk register says operational capacity has been impacted upon by COVID. And if there is no remedial or mitigating action taken, there would be a score of 16 in terms of risk and a realization if nothing is done. So you take mitigating action with the aspiration of reducing that to a target figure of 4. And I would say we're somewhere between those two things. We're not at 16 because it's not critical. And as the summer has moved forward, our position, we still are one of the very, very lowest authorities per 100,000 population in terms of COVID. But as of today, our rate is higher than it has been at any time over the last 21 months, with the rolling 7-day average above 440. And I think that was our peak figure in the 4th of January, Christmas and New Year last year. Obviously, the vaccine is rolled out, so the level of severity of illness and levels of hospitalisation in Norfolk and deaths is lower than it was in January of this year. But in terms of actual numbers of infections, we are higher in notwithstanding that overall we are significantly below the UK and England average and are the lowest authority in England per 100,000 cumulatively throughout the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, then we are asked to note this report and endorse the actions being taken by the CLT. That's detailed in the Appendix A. And to tag on to the bottom of that, if you are still of a mind to request a workshop that will perhaps take us to the next stage of understanding the information systems that are available to us, and in particular, how we might be able to do better benchmarking in the future. Are we supportive of that? Okay. Are you then content to note this report then, and with that addition for the workshop to be arranged? Okay, thank you very much. Don't need a vote on that, do you? No. Fine, thank you. Okay, then if we can move on then to item 13. Item 13 is the Public Convenience Investment Programme. Councillor Seawood.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendations as they relate to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, they were some amendments at the Cabinet. Because, I explained it at the time, but simply that the Cabinet cannot instruct or demand that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee do something. We can ask, but you are not part of the executive. So therefore, there has been a slight amendment to the fact that we would like to ask the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to consider whether they wish to look further into public toilet provision, and that we also ask that if you wish to do so, that we do receive information in relation to the scope and progress of the panel in what it does. We do have a quality of life panel that you are considering setting up, and we think that that's an appropriate vehicle to progress this. In terms of what this committee does, that is a matter for you if you wish to look at public toilet provision moving forward. The only steer that the Cabinet is saying is that we wish to maintain a comprehensive public toilet provision across the district. How that should be done in future, I think, is a matter for we'd like the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to consider. All we are doing at the moment as an administration is updating and improving our facilities in the major user areas. It's a program which started way back in 2017, 2018 from memory. And the time we've completed it by the end of 2022, we will have spent £1.2 million improving facilities, including providing changing place facilities in our major towns. To assist the panel in its work, should they wish to require some funding to help them in the process, there is a budget of 30,000 which is proposed. It's entirely a matter for the panel whether they wish to use that and to draw on that. But in terms of doing the necessary work and making it sufficiently comprehensive, I think that financial support may be necessary. So that's the context in which this is brought to you. You asked, Mr. Chairman, quite a number of questions at Cabinet from memory about this. I hope we reassured you. But apart from that steer, how you go about this and what you do, but very much saying to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, that is a matter for you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Seawood. Yes, I think I probably need to look at the chairman of that panel, the nominated chairman of that panel, to kind of take this forward as a framework in which that could be the first meaty matter that panel might consider. So I think that's really in principle what we are about today, rather than get involved in too much of what's already written in this particular document. This is a framework document that sets the parameters of a piece of work that needs to be done in the future. But however, are there any questions on that?
Just to say, I agree. I think it would be a good subject to start off the panel, and be happy to, as chair of yet a nascent panel, I feel that this would be a good subject. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? No? Are you happy then to run with the recommendations, with the third one being amended, as Councillor Seawood has indicated? I don't think there's any more changes that I would.
Can I just ask that in terms of that recommendation, that the screening committee votes to accept that request to be involved in that work going forward, essentially?
Yes, I think that was the essence of what I was trying to explain, and I think that's what the expectations are. So are you content to accept that as a task for that panel? I'm getting nods. Do you want a formal vote on that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Can I have a proposer and a seconder then? Councillor Spagnola proposes, Councillor Fisher seconds. Could I have a vote then? Show of hands. Thank you. That looks like unanimous to me. Right. Okay. So do you need anything further on that matter? No. Okay. Right. If we're all done on that, then can we turn then to the item 14, which is the councillor call for action. So this is to consider the following councillor call for action submitted by Councillor Withington, and that is to a request for overview and scrutiny to consider holding a one-day rapid review process focusing on the management and mitigation of the impact of second homes, holiday lets, bed and breakfast, Airbnbs, visitor accommodation in North Norfolk by NNDC. So that's a topic that's not unfamiliar with most of us, for sure. Just on a matter of a way forward here, the Constitution, as I understand it, limits what we can actually do today. It sets out, I think there's 6 options, and of those 6 options, the one that probably might be most appropriate here would be to request further request an officer's report, and I think probably much of our debate today needs to be around what that report might be, if you were prepared to run with that, because unfortunately the recommendation for a one-day rapid review process isn't one of those recommendations. It's in the Constitution, and so I think also, in order to inform such a review or a discussion, then we need information on which to base that on. And so that's where I see the situation at the moment. But Councillor Withington, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with you to some extent, but would like to suggest, and I'll have to be advised, obviously, as a relative newbie, what we can do. I mean, I was hoping, obviously, the one-day review is the end result of this. I was hoping that we could have some kind of open document that is decided upon. I don't think we can necessarily decide all of that today. That needs some officer input as well as to what is appropriate to go into that, but to have some open document that can be built up over a number of months, because we've still got a lot of work going on with zero budgeting and etc. COVID related work as well, that it would be unfair to put officers, I feel, under a short time scale to create that and to input the data into it. We also want to bring in outside information as well, external to the authority. So I think it's looking at how we can create that document so that the data and everything becomes filled up in time for the one-day review. So I think we're on the same lines. It's how we do it.
Yes, Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving us the time to discuss this morning. It's a subject that's gone on at many times within the council at many committee meetings, and the hope is to find a way to bring some focus to it so that we can deal with it, to actually save all the conversations that go on and concentrate it in one place. We're not saying second homes are good or bad. We think there are possibly advantages if you look at the things that have been laid out in the document in front of you today. I personally raised the questions of safety, because if we've got long-term lets, there are safety requirements. Airbnbs, not necessarily so. And if we've got that many properties that are out being let out for holiday lets and there's not the safety requirements, I think we should be aware of that and whether we should be addressing that. As Councillor Withington says, I think it's wise through people that we've met, documents we read, we all have information of what's gone on around the country, of what's worked and what hasn't worked. So there's this period of gathering information, whether that as a document or with a particular officer. It's getting that information together so that then as a committee, a group of people, that can be discussed to say, are we doing what we can with what's available as a set of tools now? What can we do in the future if we're not doing all that we can? And what would we need done elsewhere to enable us to make changes? For example, we know that in Wales, there's different taxation methods to what we have here, and then we can address that, and that becomes focused to be done so that there's a place for it all to come back. So beyond, obviously there's a concern about second homes, but I also, it's in terms of council time, both officers and members, it's a discussion that goes on all the time in many places. So my hope would be that we bring some focus to that, so we've got some clear directions of where to go and to keep those conversations, those times limited. So hopefully that kind of gives you a round of the aim. We've brought it through this route because that's the advice given, that this might be the best route to get that start. So if we can kick that process off today, as Councillor Withington says, we appreciate that will take some time, and the one-day review, if that's where we end up, is the end game, if you like. It's the gathering of information, all this information everybody has. Let's get it into one place and let's discuss it. So
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree this is a serious issue which does certainly needs analysis and debate across the district. I agree with you, though. I do think we need to sort of start gathering some metrics and data, because clearly, if we look at second homes and holiday homes, has a major impact in some parishes. Probably, I suspect, a negligible impact in more inland parishes as well. And I do think we need to understand and map that out across the district. Also, I mean, we're all aware, and we read in the press what other councils and authorities are doing to look at the issue as well. I'd also like to probably understand, as part of that analysis, what are the legislative options that we have open to us. Obviously, I think as Sir Toys mentioned, Wales probably have different legal requirements to what we have here in England. So I do think the initial start of this is some data analysis, something certainly that we do need to focus on and probably come to some conclusion going forward. So I agree with that.
Thank you.
I was perhaps just going to suggest a kind of a compromise in a way forward. I think perhaps a rapid review would be a good way to deal with this, taking into account that there is significant work going on at the council with the budget setting process. It won't be until perhaps March or April that could actually happen. In the meantime, I think members are also aware that this is a very big topic, and as Christopher has mentioned, and John, I think there needs to be consideration of exactly what would be looked at. So I think perhaps a compromising way forward, or a compromise and a way forward, would be to perhaps prepare a scoping report with input from officers across the organisation, taking into account what is being done, what are the issues, what are the legislative options, to come back to the committee to then kind of advise and lead into that rapid review process to actually understand what we can consider where the council can have an impact.
Thank you for that, Matt. Yes, I think that's probably consistent with the way in which I am thinking at the moment. I think we just need to be fairly clear about a process here. There is a sequence that we need to follow. I am slightly concerned that we don't allow it to run too long, because I think we do need to try and keep the momentum going. So I'm thinking today that we've already got amongst the discussion perhaps enough to get that scoping exercise going as the next action. That scoping piece of work could be brought back to the next meeting, perhaps.
I think with the Christmas break, that might be a struggle. It might be more realistic, given that there is already a really full agenda for January, to bring it to February, perhaps.
Well, perhaps all I'm doing is trying to keep the momentum going. If we set that as a target, should we say, and I don't think that when it comes back to overview and scrutiny that it would need a huge amount of debate, because if we've captured this, then it would just be a matter then of ensuring that officer interpretation of what we've said today is what we would like, so that we don't get disappointed when the report comes back to us later. So we just need to be sure about that. How we then progress after that, I think would be, I would be open-minded about that, as to whether it should be a substantive piece of work that comes to this and gets fitted into our work programme, or whether we deal with it as a rapid review matter is, I think, something that we can decide nearer the time. But I think for the time being, we need to get the next sort of couple of steps mapped out and take it from there. I'm mindful that I've got Councillor Fisher yet to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering how we can get town councils and parish councils involved in this, as they're at the sharp end and have a lot of input and knowledge.
Well, that's something that perhaps we can pick up, and that can be part of that brief to officers. Councillor Withington.
With my North Norfolk Town and Parish Forum hat on, that's something that we have been looking at, because obviously we've been working on second homes since 2017. And I think that would be a very good way to link through, and I said personal level would like to see that involved in that, and I think that would be a good way through for that.
Okay, anybody else wishes to speak? Councillor Troy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, also, there needs to be an opportunity, if possible, during this process, whenever you feel best for that to fit, that we get input from external experts, really. I know some people through planning projects that have gone on, and talking to them, and suddenly they drop into conversation stuff that they've been doing for the duchy in terms of affordable housing and different ways of conditioning. So there is external input that may be of value to us. So at some time in the process, it would be interesting to get that input for people that are doing new things that have not necessarily got onto the market yet. So if that, we could just keep that in mind, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Housen.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, can we involve the religious institutions? I just bring that up because West Raynham School is closing because there's not sufficient children, and because the second homes have just ripped the heart out of the village. So it would be good if we could involve perhaps the church or those sort of institutions in the discussion.
Well, your point can be taken up and can be fed into that, if you like, brief to officers, and then officers, I think, would then be able to scope out what they think is the best way forward that would incorporate the points that have been raised today. So if we're all, anybody else wishes to speak? Councillor Penfold.
I just say, I think it perhaps is more realistic and fair to ask for that scoping report back in February.
Probably.
Bearing in mind our agenda for January as well. Thank you.
Probably. Certainly, we would like to see it, I think, at the earliest point in the new year, whatever that might be. So so we ask, I think we've got a proposal basically to ask officers to prepare a report.
Excuse me,
the
Mr. Chair.
earliest.
Officer Blacks wanted to speak, I think. Sorry.
So thank you, Chair. So this is an important piece of work for this district, and that is absolutely recognised. The representation or the request for call for action has been duly made, and Councillor Withington has been advised of that. Dependent upon the scope of this piece of work, it will create capacity pressures, and the local plans team in January are obviously moving forward with the predetermined Reg 19 consultation. So the conversations that I'd had with the monitoring officer, the leader of the council, and Councillor Toy as portfolio holder was that it would be ambitious to bring this back in January. So I would be very grateful if the scoping paper could be brought to February, because I don't know whether this is possible to be discussed in a day actually, and I think what you've heard today in terms of people that might be able to make a very valuable contribution to the discussion, in a single day might be ambitious. So I think if it could be scoped, there's a lot of data that we already have. Obviously, the strategic housing team have numbers of second and holiday homes, which they do update on an annual basis, normally in April or May, but that data does exist for May 2021. That can form a baseline. I think we've got less control over booking.com or Airbnb provision, and that's something I would expect the call for action scrutiny a day to want to explore further. But to do this in January would be highly ambitious. So I just want to manage people's expectations realistically in terms of the available capacity.
I think that's understood, and that's why I think my proposal would be along the lines of to ask officers to prepare a report for the earliest possible overview and scrutiny meeting in 2022, and that report should scope the work that will need to be done and should embrace the comments that have been raised today. And I think ultimately it will be for us to decide when that comes back to this committee about where we want to set that scope. Because I think if we're not careful, we could be asking for a huge piece of work that might not actually take us to where we want to be. I think we might have to deal with this in what I would call manageable chunks, and we may have to prioritize that. So that's why I am slightly cautious about committing ourselves to a one-day review or a rapid review. How we process it, I think, is something we will perhaps be better able to decide when we know what we're dealing with and how it gets packaged. So are you comfortable then with we progress this in the way, and it is the option that's I think it is option B, request an officer's report. In this case, it's the scope, set the scope up. We'll pick up the points that we've raised and discussed today, and we will take it there stage by stage. So that's what I would propose today. I'm happy to propose that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Withington. And could I have a vote then, please, that we take that course of action? Show of hands. That looks like unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. Right, you've managed to capture enough points, I think. Have you, Matt? Good. Right. At this point, I'm conscious we've been going almost 2 hours, and we would normally have a break around this time. And I'm conscious we've got one, what I will call substantive item on the agenda, which is item 15. And since the major part of that is on pink papers, sorry, purple papers, we ought to resolve to move into part 2, as we would normally do for consideration of this, in case we may not necessarily need to look in great detail at that, but I think if we take that action now. So I don't have the wording in front of me, but maybe you've got the wording somewhere.
Yeah, so if you're proposing to exclude the press and public, that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs, I believe it's 1 and 2 of Schedule 12A as amended to the Act. So you'll need a proposer and a seconder and a vote on that.
Okay, can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Spagnola, a seconder, please. Councillor Varley. Right, show of hands to move into part 2. Thank you very much.
Just going to stop the live stream, Chair.